Interview with Laura Hiott, August 28, 1992, at 2940 Hesse Avenue, Northeast Palm Bay, Florida. Interviewer Nancy Asseco, cameraman Robert Gilbert. Camera Sony BVP50, Beta SP recorder Sony BVW35. Audio on channels 2 and 4. Copyright Brevard County Historical Commission, 1992. Laura Hiott, Tape 1. Bob, tell us when you were born and where it was.
Well, there's such a creek called Mullet Creek. Mullet is a fish, you know, one that's a jump a lot. And my father built a house near the Indian River, and I was the first child. And that's where I was born. I always say Mullet Creek because it was just a few feet from the creek.
What year was that?
October 15, 1900.
Okay, when did your family first come to Florida and to Brevard?
Well, my father and his oldest brother were from southwest Georgia. They had been farmers. They knew how to farm because they were raised on a farm. My father was 21, and his brother was about 5 years older, his oldest brother. They decided they'd start out, got a mule and wagon, come to Florida. They heard that there was some government land, homesteading. They could homestead some land perhaps and start anew, you know, and find some good land.
When was this?
So they came, this was in 1885. They started out and traveled, there were no roads, just wagon trails. And when they got as far south in Florida as Titusville, they went all the way across. They were from southwest Georgia. When they got to Titusville, our county seat, the people there said, well, you're at the end of the trail, and we suggest that you sell your horse and wagon, mule and wagon, wherever it was, and buy yourself a sailboat and sail down the river if you want to go any farther south. So that was what they did, and they settled it, landed at Melbourne Beach. In those days, there were acres and acres of pineapples grown, so they got a job working in pineapple fields. And it was pretty rough handling those stickers on the thorns, so they had to wear gauntlets on their arms, leggings on their legs to protect them. But on weekends, they were sailing around to see what they could find, maybe suitable for a place to settle. So they sailed down the river opposite Grant, went up Mullet Creek, and all those mangrove trees that overhang the creek. They got out of the boat, climbed through the limbs of the mangrove trees, went into the wilderness, dug down, found out that the soil was black, said, this is it, we're going to stop right here. So that's what they did. They built a cabin out of the cabbage, I call them cabbage palmettos, because the people used to cook the heart of the sable palm is what it really is, our state tree now, cabbage palm, we call them the old timers. And they set them up just like they grow, you know, for the sides of the cabin. And they used the palm fronds for the roof to keep from leaking and, you know, water coming in. They fixed it real good. And they cooked outdoors so that the cabin was cooler for sleeping. I guess they didn't have probably any windows much, so that's the way they did.
And that's the house where you were born?
No. My father married my mother after he came down. He didn't marry for a while. He was 35 and he was 21. My mother came with her father and her 2 brothers and sister and her sister, the real estate man. And they settled finally in Grant. My father met her there. She worked for 9 different families before she married him. $1.50 a week in her board. Keeping house, cooking, whatever. And when she told these people, their name was Barden, they came to Melbourne every winter for a number of years, that she was going to get married to Bob Smith. They said, well, he's so much older than you, you shouldn't marry him. He was 14 years older than my mother. But she married him. She said, I don't care what you say, I'm going to marry him. They wanted her to go north and meet a wealthy man. She said, I don't want any wealthy man. I love him and I'm going to marry him. So she did. And they raised enough string beans. They grew up about this high.
I think we're going to have to stop for a second here. Just
Yeah.
train.
Seemed like beans were very good to raise in order to have them get to market good shape, not wilted or anything. They took good care of them to pick them in nice sizes. My father was very particular. He didn't want us to pick any small ones. And we went to school in the summertime and helped him pick his beans in the winter. It was hard to get help. Usually our school would begin around the day after 4th of July. And we got out about Christmas time. That's the way we went to school.
So you grew 1 or 2 crops of beans in a year?
2, usually. The first crop we planted not earlier than about the middle of October, and another one in January. Because if you planted them too early, he said the worms would eat them up. The weather was warm and just so many worms, cut worms, chop them down. Well, anyhow, my mother and my father raised enough beans the first year they were married. They were married in 1898 to build the house, and it still stands. 1899 is when they built the house, the year before I was born, the big house. And quite a bit of the lumber in that house came from the ocean beach, driftwood off of ships. They had no way to get it back. Maybe a heavy storm, wind would blow it off, and people that lived in the area wanted to just pick it up because they didn't come get it, no one else. So that's what they made the house out of, part of the lumber. And it's quite a house. It's 2 stories high. And we had a celebration when Papa had been there 100 years, a few years ago. And I have a son, John, lives over there, and his wife and husband and 3 sons. They're running the Honest John Fish Camp, they call it. They sell bait and they rent boats for people to go out and catch fish.
You were saying there was something unusual about the porch on that house.
Well, the house faced the creek. It's the south side. A lot of the wind is from the south or southeast in the summer. And that creek out there came around like that into the main part of the river and went on down below there a ways. And the breeze seemed to blow real good a lot of the time on the south porch. But sometimes we have west winds, so they get on the west side. There's a porch all the way around except the east side. And he didn't have it finished on the east side because he planned to have a fireplace and have a chimney up there, but he never got that built. In fact, we guess we didn't hardly need it here in Florida. But that was his, what he thought he'd do.
How were the mosquitoes back?
Terrible. We had to live in the house in the summertime. We couldn't stand it outdoors. We had to fight them. He'd take an old pail and put a lot of sand in it, build up a smudge pot, have them around the house. Then I've seen my father take the dry palmettos, light them, and the house was built way 3 or 4 feet above the ground so he could just burn millions of them under the house where it was dark with that fan. He'd swish it around in a hurry so it'd never catch anything on fire. And in the nighttime, my mother made mosquito bars with nets. Took about 20 yards of the finest cheesecloth she could buy for the sides, and overhead it was made like a canopy. The top was made of unbleached muslin, and it had strings to the ceiling to hold it up, and it went all the way to the floor. But first, before we get under that at night, to keep the mosquitoes from biting us, we had something called Persian insect powder. It was brown looking. We put it in a pan so it wouldn't catch fire or anything. It didn't blaze, it just smoked. Close the windows and doors. And when you went to the door and listened and didn't hear mosquitoes singing, you knew they were all dead, or you thought they were. Then you could go in and get under this mosquito net and go to bed. You had to fight them. They'd kill you. They would. But thank the Lord they were not malaria mosquitoes. I don't think anyone had malaria around here then, not that I know of.
I've heard of mosquito brushes. Now, what were
Yeah, I
those?
have one in the house. I should have brought it out. Well, it's when the palmetto, these cabbage palmetto trees are growing, before they get full, big palm frond, you cut it off and strip it up, let it dry. And they made hats and caps and pans and different things out of them. People used what was available, what they had at hand. My father had felt sorry for the bear and other animals. He said, well, I'm going to dig a bear well. So he dug a bear well out beyond our house ways, and he sloped it down so the animals, the bear or any animal, could go down and drink water and back out. And that was always known as the bear well.
It's like a cistern for the bears.
To we children. And he never had any meat markets. He always went to the woods and killed deer, bear, over to the beach, sea turtle or whatever. There was, I think, a law on them, but they never enforced it years ago.
Did you ever see a bear, run into one?
Oh, yes. We were on the beach looking for turtle one time, and there was a bear. And the man behind his rein, he had a gun, so I don't know whether he killed it or not. But yes, there were bear. My brother killed some. Brother John was a good hunter. We had lots of wild ducks in the fall of the year. The mallard ducks would fly from down up north. But after they stayed here a while and ate fish, made them taste fishy. So Mother would cook them, and I think she put a little baking soda in the water, parboil them before she baked them.
We're going to have to close the door here.
Well, I'm glad this will make it cooler. Maybe it probably won't last too long.
Transportation in Brevard. How long it took to get
Pretty
places?
slow.
Okay, hang on, wait. When you're ready.
Pretty slow, sailboat. But my father loved that kind of transportation. It's the most peaceful, quiet, But if the wind died out, you had the pole, and that wasn't, I guess, much fun. But to pick beans until 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we'd get them ready to be shipped by express that night, and you take them over to Grant. It's about 1.25 miles, 1.5 miles in a sailboat, and ship them to northern markets by express that night.
In the railroad?
Yes, by train. Mm-hmm. They'd set a lantern out at the depot there, and the express train would stop. They'd know that they had something. Other people probably had something to ship too. But my father's slogan on his letterheads was R.T. Smith, in beans I trust, because that's where he made his living for years.
Did you learn how to sail a boat yourself?
No, but I don't remember when I learned how to row a boat.
You were that young.
Yeah. I remember my brother Charner, the one in age next to me, he's about 2 years younger than I, would take my mother sometimes and my brother John, the one that's still over the river, and go down about 1 mile in a rowboat to see the Lathams, Mrs. Latham. You've heard of Oak Lodge? That's where she had. And we'd been watching Halley's Comet one night, and everything all brightened up. We didn't know. We thought maybe the tail of that thing caught on fire. And it was her hotel. She'd set it on fire and burned it up. And then she left town, went back to Utica, New York, where she came from. She was quite a woman. And they used to go out, my father and other people. She was one of them. And she was the only woman we ever saw dressed like a man. Women didn't dress like overalls on like they do now, then. And pick these salt palmetto berries, the low kind. And it was a good place for rattlesnakes. You had to watch out in those thickets. Well, they picked them, and then they made trays about this wide, maybe this long, and they had slats, narrow slats of wood, and a space between where the air could get to them. And they put the berries in there and hung them up from the ceilings out on their porches to dry. And they shipped them to Detroit, Michigan. There was a pharmaceutical company that made tonic medicine out of them. And that's one of the things they had to make a little money coming in. That was it.
you talked about using sailboats to get around. What about the first roads around here? How were they made?
Well, we didn't come to Grant very often, but there was just a dirt road, and then they put crushed oyster shells. The people who lived here years ago must have lived on oysters almost, because there were just loads of them. They hauled them out by train loads. There's the cars like they use haul Otis rock in to make roads, and then they use them for chicken crushed for the chickens. For the chickens, they sold them, but it was just loads and loads of oysters, shells, you know. And I remember how hard it was to pick beans down on those rough places where you had to kneel or stoop to pick them. You always had to pad your knees. Went down there and picked some beans for someone, string beans that lived down there years ago. But it was hard life, but you know, it's what we were accustomed to, and we didn't mind it. It was just a part of our living, and we didn't know any better, I guess. You know, just part of it.
Let's see. Can we cut for a second? I want to adjust the railroads and whether you ever took a train ride.
Well, Mother had 8 children, and she heard that they were going to have a little rodeo or parade or something and a fish fry in Melbourne. So she took her 8 children out to get on 30. That was the number of train going up between 11 and 12, and we would come back on 29 between 5 and 6. So the conductor said, "Well, Mother, where are you going with your brood?" She said, "I thought I'd take my children out for a little outing up to Melbourne." He said, "Well, I'm not going to charge you anything for them, just 25 cents to Melbourne from Grant." It was 25 cents. So we went to the fish fry. She thought she'd be real nice to her children. They had an old theater there. And she had no idea what it was going to be, the picture. It turned out to be Lon Chaney and a Hunchback of Notre Dame. And, oh, she thought that was terrible to take her children to see such a terrible-looking old man. But that's what we saw. Well, we stayed, and we met some people from Sebastian, that's south of Grant. And they said they were going to come back at night. That night, would we like to ask my mother if she'd like to stay with the children and come back on a boat. They had a big boat with a cabin. We knew them. So we came back that way and saw the fireworks. That was an outing we had.
Sounds like a wonderful time.
And my aunt, my mother's sister, lived in Malabar. Their name was Bolton. Charlie Bolton used to carry the mail in a sailboat from Titusville to Jupiter Inlet. That was before the railroads came. I never remember that. That was before I was born. But that was quite a thing he did. And one time my aunt, my mother's sister, said she was going to be nice to my mother's children and her children, and they were going to go out and pick huckleberries. There were loads of huckleberries west of Tillman. This was Tillman. So we could pick a quart in a little while. There were just loads of them. And we'd go out in a wagon with her children, and she always said, "Watch out for snakes. There might be snakes in there now. You gotta be careful." So we had more huckleberry pies, and everything was delicious. You don't see them anymore. They're freezes, colds, or something's happened to them.
Sounds like you had a pretty good diet.
We had a wonderful diet. We never had anything but a cold until we started school. We went barefoot till we went to school, and they bought us some shoes to wear. We were healthy kids. And for Christmas, my father would go out and cut a wax myrtle tree, and we made all the decorations for it, popcorn and paper chains, and Mother knew how to weave some little paper baskets. And if we got a package of Zuzu ginger snaps or a 10-cent package of lemon snaps when my father would go to town to carry the beans over, stop by the grocery store, we thought we had something. We enjoyed any little thing we get, appreciated it, because we didn't get much,
What kind of toys did you have?
Well, every Christmas there was usually a baby in the family. My father and mother had a nice little red wagon. We'd pull the baby. The older one, I was the oldest, and my brother would push the wagon and take the baby. Sometimes we'd tip him over in the yard, but he'd get up and he'd brush him off, and he'd be all right. But that was the kind of things we had. We didn't have much, and we didn't expect much. We had Victrola, wind up for music, and my father played violin, but he never would let any of the children touch it. He never knew a note. There were 5 brothers, and they never knew a note. Just whatever they could hear, get it in their ear, and they'd play it. And he was the life of the party. He'd play a while, and then he'd get up, jig a little bit, and sing a little bit. Would you like for me to sing a little song for you, one he liked?
I'd love it.
Well, he was from Georgia, and this is called Savannah Home. Where the balmy air is sighing, and the roses catch the dew, and the mockingbirds are singing in the trees. There's a charming, lovely city, and I'll ever hold it true. I was brought up among its butterflies and bees. In the pastures and the fields, I've lived the whole day long, but from all of them I've been obliged to roam. But when I think of the happy times, the merry dance and song, I long to see my dear Savannah home. Oh, I long to see you once again, and feel that scented breeze, and through those sunny streets I long to roam. Oh, I long to hear the mockingbirds singing in the trees that grow around my dear Savannah home. That's what he loved, because he was from Georgia, Well, I tried to find the music. I didn't know whether I'd ever find it. I wrote to Columbia, South Carolina. I wrote to Atlanta, Georgia, and no one ever heard of it. But I went to a show in Washington, D.C., a one-man show. He picked 4 or 5 banjos. And after the show was over, I said to one of the ladies who was helping, when he gets dressed, he exercised, danced, and working with his instruments till he was just real sweaty, from exercise. When he gets cleaned up, tell him I would like to speak to him. Because he was a musician, I thought maybe he had heard of this Savannah Home. She said no, he hadn't heard of it. He had heard someone say something, but he didn't know about it. So he told me of a man at the Library of Congress who was up on folk music and stuff, said he might be able to help you, and he did. And they sent it to me. It's a kind of a Negro minstrel, thing. But I think it's pretty.
Beautiful tune.
And he liked to play that, my father did.
Were there any songs that anyone wrote about this area?
Well, I have one at home over there. It's about the Indian River. My son's 4th grade teacher, she passed away a year or so ago, she wrote it. She lived in the apartment that overlooks the river, up on the bluff, we call it, in Melbourne. And she lived there, I think it was 43 years. She looked at that river every day, and she wrote this poem. It's kind of pretty. I think probably other stories or poems have been written, maybe, but I know about that one. I have that one.
Okay. What are the early businesses that you recall in this area?
Well, there were only 2 stores in Grant. There was just one until my father and another man went in business together. And it was 1904. I think that's a mosquito after me or something. Anyway,
let's get rid of that bug.
they
Tell me about the different businesses that were there.
Well, these people had a store next door. There was just a road or street between us. My father's put up a store. He thought, well, since he had a big family, we'd save some money to put up a store and have groceries. He could buy wholesale, and my mother and we children could run it while he ran the farm. He said he couldn't make a living on the west side. The river was all white sand, and over there he had black, good soil. And he just loved that place, and he could make a living, and he was always bringing over things. He'd come and go, and some days we'd go over and stay with him all day and cook dinner for him or pick beans for him. But anyhow, this man was Danish. They were from Denmark, the older people. And they didn't want anybody else to get into anything business like they were in. And he was very mad when my father bought this piece of land and filled up the store. And then later made living quarters where we could be there in the place, because the other person, he wanted to go back to North Florida, where he came from. So that's the way it was. But the town didn't grow. They wouldn't sell land to anybody much. They just wanted the Danish people in there. Now that they're all dead and gone nearly, the town is growing some. But he got murdered. There was murder. He used to sell groceries and go out on Saturday mornings and with a mule and wagon delivering wagon load of groceries, and sometimes he had 100-pound sack of chicken feed or some kind of laying up on the seat or somewhere around him. This day he started out, he'd go out on Saturday morning. We saw him leaving, the store and going west. The highway was west of the railroad track in those days, the Dixie Highway. And this man waylaid him. He hid along. But he was strange. He was a strange man, and he had been crawling in the grass. They found some green grass between the barrels of the gun or something. Anyhow, the section crew came along. We had crews that kept up the railroad tracks. Now they don't have to do that. They have rocks that hold the rails and the cross ties better than just the dirt, the sand. They saw this mule standing there with the wagon stopped. The railroad track was near where the highway was, old Dixie. And they went over, and there was a man laying down in the road, or by the road, dead. He'd shot him. And the mule had sense enough to stand still and stayed right there. Well, they went, some of them stayed with the mule and the wagon until they went on to Grant and told people, notified them about what they found. Well, that was a big, very big trial. It went to the United States Supreme Court. And we had a governor, Governor Sidney Katz, that pardoned him. My father helped arrest him. We were scared to death. There were 4 of them. My father, the High Sheriff Joe Brown from Titusville, he was a sheriff for about 20 years. No one dare run against him because they would lose. And the deputy sheriff from Melbourne, and the chief of police of Cocoa, Mr. Gilbert. Well, the two of them went first. My father said, we better not all 4 of us go to this house and knock first. So my father and one of the men, one of them, I don't know, it wasn't Joe Brown, the sheriff, but one of them, the deputy, I guess, or Mr. DeBert. And he came to the door, and my father knew him. He'd been to our house. He'd been in the store and bought things, and he'd even eat supper with us sometimes. And we thought he acted strange. He sat at the table, and he just looked all around the walls and acted a little bit, different. But we never knew he was this kind of a person. But anyhow, they entertained him, talked to him a while. And then the sheriff came in and the other man. And my father introduced him to Sheriff Brown. And Mr. Brown told him, he said, I have to get you on the train as soon as we do. Now, you get ready. We're going to take you to Titusville. We'll explain more later. So they took him and put him in jail. He was from a wonderful family in Virginia.
What year was this? When did this happen?
1914, I believe it was. We hadn't been living in Grant too long. But it was such an exciting time, and we were so afraid that my father going to the house where he was, what might happen? He might shoot some of them or something. One of his shoes was run over in the heel or somewhere, and they tracked it, with that. And they found some grass sticking in the barrel of the gun or something where he'd been crawling along, tried to waylay this old fellow. But it was my father and, well, just about everybody in Grant went to the trial in Titusville, and it went to the United States Supreme Court and all around. But he pardoned him. But then later we heard that they got him for good. Some other time, another place.
Okay, let's
But that was one of the terrible things that happened down there.
This is an interview with Laura Hiott, August 28, 1992, and it's done at 2940 Hesse Avenue, Northeast, Palm Bay, Florida. Interviewer Nancy Asseco, cameraman Robert Gilbert. Camera equipment Sony BVP50, Beta SP recorder, Sony BVW35, audio on channels 2 and 4. Copyright Brevard County Historical Commission, 1992. Laura Hiott, tape 2. School and then later.
Well, we couldn't get to school, only by sailboat. So my mother took it upon herself to go to the school and get some books so that she could teach her children. She painted 3 blackboards for the 3 older ones, Charner, John, and I. And every evening after we ate supper, we call it supper, we had to go in that living room and learn our lesson, ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. Well, my brothers were not a bit interested in books. They wanted to be in that river fishing, crabbing, or whatever. So they didn't learn very much, I guess, that time. But I studied, I loved it. My daughter loved it when I was teaching her when she was young. And when I got into the school, I was in my 10th year. And I passed through the 1st grade, I passed through the 2nd grade to the 3rd grade because Mother had taught me. She knew the need of an education. She lived in Missouri and they had to walk 2.5 miles to school, 2.5 miles back home, cross 2 streams of water with stepping stones when it was dry weather, but when it rained, there was the snow melted. Father would come in the wagon, and the horses had to swim to get across that water for them, take them home. So I just loved school, and I had a first teacher. She was from Malabar. Her name was Ada Comstock, and she was from Florida, and I always remember her. And then the next teacher we had came from Malabar, and she came on horseback or had a buggy when it was raining and had a horse. You know, sometimes try to get him up on the front porch of the old schoolhouse, but she couldn't get him up there. And then the next one I had was Miss Norwood. She came from Titusville. Usually they board, you know, in the community, some of the children's parents. And after that I had one teacher for 3 years, when I was in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, and she'd walk to the school. That little house down there in Grant, that historical house, was she and her husband's house. And some of the old clothes that she made and things in there, she loved to do handwork. She made them. She was a very nice teacher.
What was a school day like? What would you do in school?
Well, the teacher always read from the Bible. We had prayer in the mornings. And sometimes we'd sing a little song, like My Country 'Tis of Thee, or something about America or something. A little introduction to school, you know, starting the day. And then we'd get started in our lessons. And there were not too many of us, but everyone had a number of subjects they were studying. At one time I had about 8 or 10 when I got farther up in 7th, 8th grade. Every night we took lots of books home to study, work our arithmetic and things that we had to learn for the next day. And I loved spelling, and the teacher said if you'd write your word on the blackboard or somewhere, we had slates and we had scratch paper, wasn't good ink paper, but pencil paper. Write it 10 times and you know it. And that was one of my favorite subjects. I learned to like spelling. And it came time for me to go to the 9th grade, and there was no way to get there in Melbourne. They didn't have any school buses then. It was in 1918. So Mr. and Mrs. Hastings, Oliver's parents, came down to see my father and mother. And they said, let Laura come up and live with us. We just love to have her. So they let me go. And that was the best school year I ever had because I didn't have to help Mama with the children or the store. I could study a lot. And Mr. Hastings was taking care of 2 or 3 big houses down by the river from where they lived, in Cocoa. And they had big cisterns of water, rainwater. So Saturday morning I'd take my clothes and go down and wash them and hang them on the hedge or whatever was placed, and then later go down and take them in, iron them, get ready for school next week. But they were very nice to me, and I never will forget them. They didn't charge my parents very much, and we got along just fine. And that was my first experience of being away from home, going to school. The next year, they got a deputy sheriff. His name was Baber Rhodes from Melbourne. Had a Model T Ford, and he picked me up first. I was the only one ready to go into the 10th grade. I'd passed the the 9th grade up there in Cocoa. I worked hard to study, but I couldn't finish my algebra. I'd take that over in the 10th grade, but they passed me, the 10th grade. So I worked, I studied, and that was the only 9-month term I ever had. That was the year the war ended, World War I. And we went to school in this Model T, pick me up, and then go up the road 3 miles on the Old Dixie Highway, pick up Eliza Sweet-Diaz. Her father was one of the officers of the school board. And then we'd go to Vallenbar, 3 more miles up the road, and he had a little homemade trailer that he hitched on to the back of the Model T and picked up maybe half a dozen, not very many, children. Never had a door at the back of it. One day a hitchhiker dropped in with them. They all hollered. David Woods went back and got him out on the road again. But it took us an hour to go 12 miles. The roads were pretty bad, and if you got off the shell part, the crushed oyster shell part of the road, get in the sand, and you have to push to get out of the sand, you know. It was like it is today. Uh-oh. That's all right. But I loved school, and when I went to school in Cocoa, I'd just come home on the train. They had a little measles, and they closed the school for a couple of weeks. That was one time I was up there. But anyhow, they had a male teacher. He was from Wilcox, Florida. His name was Raymond J. Lindsay. And he said to me, I wonder if you could teach for me a couple of weeks. The boys hit my knee with a ball or bat or something, and I'm on crutches, and I'd just like to have you teach. And I was 16, and I didn't know anything about teaching. I said, listen, just make out a schedule, how the classes come every day. There was just 1 or 2 in a class, you know, not very many of us. And I'll try. So I got along with them all right. There was 17 of them. But I don't know, I think I wasn't cut out to be a school teacher, maybe, I don't know. But I like children. I kept the nursery over at the First Baptist Church, the little ones, for 14 years. And I helped them in Bible school. And I think anything that will help children be better children and learn, it's a wonderful profession. I think it's good, you know.
Were you ever part of any dramatic productions or different plays? Or
I used to dance some when my father would play for dancers and other people. We had dances sometimes up at the old schoolhouse, not the schoolhouse where I went, but the one that's now is their civic building down there in Grant. And I met a boy there that was a good dancer. He taught me how to waltz, and that was not a dance I liked. And we just had a Victrola up in the old Ridgeland House. It was a hotel up on the hill north of the school there, building. And that, I don't know if you ever heard it, My Olive Golden Dreams. We used to dance to that. Out of the mist, lips I have kissed, so tenderly, and it goes along. But I wrote to him for years. He left here. He was an archaeologist. And he went to Paris first, and then he went down into Africa after he married. He was from Wisconsin. And just now I'm writing to one of his daughters. I have been for a while. She's been in Africa. She's never married. She's a minister. And they're lovely people. They had a little tent tavern there in Grant. There were two brothers, Lonnie and Eddie Pond was their names. The father dressed up like the mother one Halloween night, and he dressed up like her, you know, and they won the prize. They were just excellent, excellent dancers. We had a lot of fun. You know, we just made our own entertainment. You know, people get together, and sometimes if some people didn't play dance, well, they'd play card swap, you know. And someone make a cake or some punch or whatever, something. Just nice.
Do you remember any tent shows or anything like that coming through?
Well, here in Palm Bay, there used to be a man that was a magician, and he died since we came here. But he was very good. And then there was another one that worked with him. He was a juggler. They worked a lot together around the Catholic Church. They have big things in the fall of the year, you know. But you knew everybody knew you. It's just a different world today. You don't really know your neighbors sometimes, you know. It's just like a big family almost, the way it used to be. And everybody seemed to enjoy the other's company and parties and things.
You mentioned, you were talking about World War I being over. Do you remember that there was rationing during World War I?
Yes, we had sugar ration, some of the things. Yes.
And then, I guess...
And then we knitted, sometimes I knitted some washcloths. I'm not a very good knitter. I've never learned to make a sweater, but we did everything to help in the effort. Johnny, my son, joined the Boy Scouts I thought it'd be good for him to join the Boy Scouts after we moved to Palm Bay. And I used to take my little two-wheel cart and collect newspapers for them. And they collected automobile tires and different things for the war effort, you know, to make some money.
In World War II?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, well, and it was later, too.
Yeah. Do you recall the plane spotters and all of that sort of thing?
Oh, we sat up in a tree, and every time we'd see a plane fly over, ground observers. Yeah, we had a band on our shoulders, my mother, and it was 24 hours, you know. Up there, they had a ladder up in the cabbage tree there by the river at Grant.
You climbed up the tree?
Well, we went up the steps, you know, and then there was a place where you had a telephone where you could call. We called Tampa. Any kind of flying object, of you know, any plane or anything, you had to report what you saw. And my husband would work 8 hours a day in the carpentry business till we moved here. And I don't know whether you've ever seen these lookout towers over on the ocean side. He stood up there. I think it was 4 hours at night. If someone didn't come to relieve him longer than that, and then come home. They were Coast Guard auxiliaries. He had a uniform and everything. Mm-hmm. Everybody tried to do their part, and did.
Well, what were they worried that was going to happen?
Well, you know, there was submarines off the coast here, and people were told not to burn any lights shining out toward the ocean, but there was a family of Germans down in Grant that did, and they got after them. You know, people should do what they're supposed to do, because if it was an enemy, they'd see lights there, they might come and, you know, do something dangerous. You never know. The first seaplanes landed, I think it was about 1912. There were 3 of them. They had pontoons under them, you know, down at Mr. Catch's place there. Mr. Catch was a mechanic. He was an inventor. He invented the turbine pumps, pump water out of the Everglades and places. And he just loved Sebastian Inlet. He was one that helped get it started, opened up. They got dredge in there and everything. They worked hard first with shovels, and then it filled right up. And that's a dangerous inlet. There's lots of rocks in there. And one man, Mr. Arnold, Ed Arnold, I think was his name, his first name. There's some people came down from Kansas, Topeka, I think it was, and there were about 25 of them. They wanted to go out. It was on Sunday, out into the ocean. And he had a nice going ocean-going boat with a cabin. But there were so many of them, he didn't want to take them, really. They got on the bow, and they went out. It was fine. It was pretty choppy, and he told them it was pretty choppy. He didn't really want to go. But 14 of them drowned. When they turned, the boat turned over. You know, people should listen to the captain of a boat or anything and do what they say, because that would save them from being drowned. He didn't want to go.
Let's see. We talk a little bit about when the stock market crashed in the Depression here. I guess there wasn't much cash around.
We were in South Carolina in the early 30s, and my husband had worked for Ford Motor Company in Jacksonville. He was on the assembly line, the body and trim department. He had to wear a little black tie, and he didn't like that. He is a farmer, you know. He didn't like to be dressed that way. But anyhow, they kept promising him to start up again. They closed down. The Depression was coming on, you know. First it was, everything in Florida was selling, you know, real estate. Everything went wild, and then the whole thing fell out, bottom. But we got on the farm. He said, Laura, let's go up to my homestead in Carolina, South Carolina. I know how to farm. He said, I was raised on a farm. They won't starve us. We'll make something to eat. So we got along pretty good, but we worked very hard. We had a pig, you know, he'd kill it when it grew up to be a hog, and I bought a cow, and she was a Holstein, black and white. She didn't give anything but blue milk. So we fattened her up and sold her for beef, and then we got one that was a good black-tongued Jersey. She gave 6 quarts twice a day of milk with nice thick cream. And I'd never milked a cow. I learned how to milk. After we brought her home, it was late in the day. We'd been picking peanuts, you know, picking peanuts growing to the ground, and we'd been over to one of my husband's cousin's house picking peanuts off. And she said she would sell a sold cow. So I was glad we bought her, but she hated my daughter. She'd put her head down and shake it, you know, had to keep her in the lot or she'd killed her. And she was frightened to death of that old Lucy. But I'd milk her. First, though, the morning after we got home, it was late and we went to bed that night. Doc said, well, I guess I'll go out and see if I can milk old Lucy while you cook breakfast. Cooking on a wood stove, you know. Said, all right. Pretty soon here he came back. I said, what's the matter? He said, I can't make old Lucy stand still. She just goes around and around. I said, let me go out there. I bet I can do something with her. Maybe I can. So I fed her the first thing in the trough, you know, some feed, get busy eating while I milked her. She didn't bother me. She had very short tits, kind of hard to milk. But good milk, I never did like any other cow's milk as well as hers. And she was good.
So you came back here after?
After that, and my husband went to fishing. He had a brother that was doing commercial fishing. Fishing used to be good. Sometimes they wouldn't make but $5 a night, and again you might make 50. Fishing was much better than it is today, and the fish tasted so much better. The water, you never heard the word pollution in the Indian River, you know. It just wasn't such a thing. When people come and throw all kinds of things in the water, it makes it polluted. You know that. And so...
How did they fish? Did they go out?
He had a gill net. You've seen them on racks, haven't you, out by the fish houses? Corks come to the top, you know, the net, and then the leads rated down toward the bottom. And they'd fish all night. They put a light on their net and come in the mornings, and usually they'd clean some mullet or fish. That was our favorite. Just common fish to eat, and clean them and have them for breakfast when they got ashore home. And then they go to bed and rest a while because they were up most of the night. And after we ate lunch or dinner or whatever, they would go down and mend their nets because there were big fish that would get in the net and tear up the webbing, made out of, well, now they have filament or something they call it, but it used to be linen twine. And my husband knew how to mend. He learned how to mend the nets. They had to mend them or the fish would go right through, the holes. So it was quite a bit of work, but they seemed to enjoy it. And I worked in the crab factory. They had a factory there where they had blue crabs, and they cook them, steam them, and they only gave me 8 cents a pound for picking the meat. And the claw meat, the dark meat, sold for 25 cents a pound, and the body meat, 30 cents a pound. This was back in the early 30s when Lindbergh went to Paris, along by, and that baby was kidnapped, that was the time, in the 30s.
There were citrus groves going in all around here when you were growing up. I guess you saw that.
Well, when my father got to raising so many beans, he was stooping a lot, and he got lumbago in his back. And he said, I've got to get into something else, something that's easier to gather. And he asked the old-timers, the people who had been living here, what kind of seed to plant to have a citrus grove. And they told him grapefruit seed. And then you could learn to bud, he said. So that's what he did. He had little rows of grapefruit seedlings coming up, and he'd bud those. He learned to bud, and he was in demand for other people to have him come and bud things for them. And when he died in 1948, he was 84 and a half years old, he had practically, or just around that much, 20 acres of bearing citrus of various kinds that he grew from grapefruit seeds. He was very proud of his growth.
Was that over on the barrier island?
Yeah, it was on the old place where he homesteaded.
I guess there aren't any of those trees left.
Oh, they're dead. John, my brother that lived there, he didn't care. He just let them die. But I guess they would have died from old age maybe by now anyway. But anyway, he never came over to see us every day or every night, but he'd come over, and when he'd come, he always had a watermelon in a croaker sack on his back. He had some vegetables or something else he had raised to bring home for Mama to cook. She was a good cook. And we cooked things she would for him to take over there, but he could cook too. He could make hoe cake. You know what hoe cake is?
Is it like a pancake?
You make it like a biscuit, only a little stiffer, the dough, and fry it in a frying pan. They used to turn it with a hoe. That's where they got, years ago, that's where they say they got the name of hoe cake. But my husband's very fond of that, and I used to make it. You didn't want the fire too hot under the old iron frying pan. You didn't cook it in a thin frying pan. And seemed like everything tasted better. That was cooked on a wood stove or an iron pot. I don't know, it was just different.
And let's cut. We're at the end of this room.
Am I talking?
Interview with Laura Hiott, August 28, 1992, at 2940 Hesse Avenue, Northeast, Palm Bay, Florida. Interviewer Nancy Yaseko, cameraman Robert Gilbert. Equipment, camera Sony BVP50, Beta SP recorder Sony BVW35, audio on channels 2 and 4, copyright Brevard County Historical Commission, 1992, Laura Hiott, tape 3. Okay, please tell us about this 4th grade teacher.
Written by Bessie Reeves, Indian River was this story or poem, who has looked out the windows upon this river for 43 years. It is like an old friend, Indian River. Bessie Reeves was a very active teacher right to the end of her living on earth. She loved people and was concerned about their learning, about what was most rewarding. I was fond of her and her sincerity in all she did for others without expecting any reward. Her appreciation of what others did was proven by a shelf of our booklets, one each from way back and one on her table in the living room after she left us on earth. The good teachers like Bessie Reeves help instill the knowledge of the benefits of good that has been done in our area by those now grown. This was written by her friend, Elbert Leisure, who made one of these little booklets each year for years. And found this in Bessie Reeves' thing and then gave it to her, Johnny, my son, and I. Indian River. The Indian River lies languid along the Florida coast. For miles her brackish waters to many a fish are host. Her tropical shores reach far apart. Her bed is deep and wide, and the silent crane and heron stand watching by her side. Ever up and down her channel fly yacht, dredge, tug, and boat, while in her quiet backwash contented mallards float. Daily the naked sunshine makes glassy this lagoon. By night she is often silvered by a mellow southern moon. Man's harried hustle she little notes, nor does she heed young laughter, but holds within her voiceless deep the now, before, and after. She wanted something about me, and she got my picture. You can have that if you want it.
All right. Let's go on to some more things about Grant and Palm Bay area. What was the early postal system like down there?
Well, we had a little post office in the store next to our store. They had a little bit of everything. They just about run the town. They had the only telephone in town hanging on the wall, you know, those old-fashioned kinds. They had a telegraph office. The lady was running the store most of the time. There were several sisters. Their name was Jorgensen. They were Danish people. And she learned from a man they sent to teach her how to dot dash, you know, that kind of telegraphy. She learned. And so they had the only telephone, the only telegraph office, the only express office, the only post office, and for a long time the only store. So they about run the town, you know. That was a bad thing. We got mail on 2 trains twice a day. We really got better service than you get today. Because I put a letter in my mailbox the other day. 3 days they didn't pick it up. I had the flag up. I guess they just didn't see it. But that isn't right. They should pick it up. The train that went north was number 30, and it came in between 11 and 12 o'clock every day. And took the mail, and they hung it up on a crane, and they grabbed it with a big arm, iron arms. Sometimes it'd fall down and go under the train, or sometimes, you know, very rarely, but once in a while. And the post offices were small, and the postmistress was always nice, and she'd get your mail whenever you wanted to go and get it twice a day. And then the train that came down in the evening came between 5 and 6 o'clock, 29. That was number 29. It carried passengers, it carried express, it carried baggage and mail. My father used to have a friend who was in the mail car, and when he'd see a letter addressed to my father, Mother said before they were married, he'd show her where his friend would write a little note or say, "Hello, Bob," or something. But people just were like a big family. You knew everybody, and everyone knew you. You know, it was just different. I think it was a nice way to live.
And cut for a second.
No.
Same. Cut. Same thing. Tell us about Miss Latham and the manatee.
Well, Mrs. Latham lived about a mile south of where I was born, on the east side of Indian River, Mullet Creek. She lived farther down, about a mile. At her place, she called it Oak Lodge. There were a lot of oak trees. And her daughter's name was Queenie. And my mother's youngest brother married Queenie. Well, Queenie was a lovely young lady, but her mother was just not so refined, and, you know, she was just different. And my mother said that she and Aunt Queenie, she was later my aunt, were going over to cook for the men and women. That I guess Miss Latham was the only woman out with a bunch of men picking saw palmetto berries. And so when they all came in for lunch, my mother said they had a nice chicken dinner, everything. Ms. Latham said, "You got some hot water, some boiling water?" "What do you want with some boiling water?" "Oh, I'm going to make some hasty pudding." And she took some cornmeal and stirred it up in hot water. And not one of them would eat any of it. They ate this lovely lunch or dinner which my mother and her sister-in-law cooked. So that was the way that was. Well, it was quite a place that she had. She made guava jelly. There were plenty of guavas back in the early days, and different things, different sea grape jelly and different things that you don't get every day. And she had a lot of northern people, some wealthy people, and some very intelligent people came to her place. Sometimes they would go out in the woods between the ocean and her house and the river and kill some animal, and there was taxidermists who'd mount some of them, the head or something. It was quite an interesting place, and we liked to go down there when we were children and see them and see the place. But one time, I don't know who helped her, but she caught a sea turtle, sea cow, we used to call them. Manatees, they're really what they are now, they call them. And of course, it was against law now to have one, but she got it and had it tied up to a dock or near the wharf, she called it, and had some men put it in a tank and ship it to Smithsonian. I don't know what they did with it. But years ago, there were a lot of Indian mounds. There was an Indian mound on my father's place, and one time a man came and dug in this Indian mound and got a nice vase. It had 2 handles, and it looked like it was pretty big. And he sent my father a picture of it after he took it. I love Smithsonian. I've been there, different things they have in Washington, D.C., and it's very interesting. But this old lady decided she'd burn her house down. It was the night that the Halley's Comet was the brightest, along about 1908 or 10, long through there. It was years. Well, we were awakened with this bright light shining in our windows on the south side of our house. Her house was south of ours. We decided maybe that comet caught on fire. It's just been watching it that evening. But it was her house, and she left town after that. They said there were no valuables found. She had them all packed away, and she was just a wicked old woman. But the nicest thing was her daughter. Her daughter was just the opposite to what she was. She was just different. And when her daughter died, she left 5 little girls. My mother's youngest brother married her daughter. Uncle Lon Wells was their last name. She had typhoid, and she had a very young baby, just a few weeks old, and they had to let someone adopt it. Uncle Lon, my mother's brother, had to let someone, the family, out of the family, adopt the baby, but the rest of them, he wouldn't let anyone adopt any of them. They were all girls, 5 little girls. And they used to go to the beach and gather shells. And there was some kind of white shells that resembled angel wings. And she gathered those and covered Aunt Queenie's grave with those. And when her mother died, now this is what Papa said before I was born, before Mama and Papa were married, I think. Her mother was living over there with her. And she often told her daughter, she said, "Don't ever bury me out here in these woods. I don't want to be buried here. I'm buying a lot up in Georgiana on Merritt Island, and I'm going to be buried there." Well, poor soul died, and Papa said there were boats there and people that wanted to take her body. But she says, "No, I'm going to put her right out there on the trail to the ocean beach, right along by the trail." I remember seeing the grave out in these woods. Well, she hired a man to take a stone and put it up in the Georgiana cemetery so people would think she was buried there, see? She was wicked. She was awful.
That was Miss Latham's mother.
It was her mother. Now, that was when Papa first came, before Mama and Papa were married, but he used to tell us about it. I don't think Mama was living. But Papa played for a dance in Grant one time. I was young. I must have been about 4 years old. My brother Charner next to me in age, he was about 2. There was about 2 or 3 years difference in our ages. We got the measles. Papa took them, and then he got over them, but they were bad for him. They didn't know to shade the windows to keep the light, and they affected his eyes later, you know. And Mama said that Mrs. Latham's daughter, Queenie was her name, brought the nicest scalloped oysters. They scalloped them, I think, and baked it with milk and butter and whatever. But they couldn't either one touch it. Papa didn't eat butter and milk anyway. He's just a person that didn't like it. So Mama says we'll never have a cow because he doesn't like the smell of milk around, so we'll just use the canned milk or dry milk. So that's what we had. But it was always amusing to go down to her place. She had so many interesting things, and you meet nice people, but I was small and I don't remember all the things they told, but it was quite a place.
There were some other hotels around here.
There was one in Grant called the Ridgeland House, and it was up, there's a little ridge, a little bit higher land than just ordinary down by the Winn-Dixie Road there. And they had people coming every winter. There was a man and his wife from Providence, Rhode Island. Their name was Weeks, W-E-E-K-S. They wanted to take Sarah, the oldest one of Aunt Queenie and Uncle Lon's daughters, one to adopt her and send her to school, educate her. And Uncle Lon said no. I said I will not let anyone adopt any of my girls except the baby. That one I will have to have someone take her. I said, well, that's all right. We'll take her. We'll send her to school and educate her, which they did. And it happened that she went to Brown's University and graduated. She studied Greek and she studied art. She was well educated, and that's the school where Linda, my granddaughter, went. In fact, she's a graduate of Brown's University.
And I guess Northerners would come down just to see.
Yes, and they had what they call chambermaids, you know, to take care of the rooms and clean up. And, you know, they didn't have bathrooms like they have nowadays and everything, so modern. But they had good cooks, and it was, the regular ones would come quite often, you know, in the wintertime to get out of the cold weather and just enjoy it.
Do you recall the Indian River regattas when they used to run the boat races on the river?
No, that was before my time. I heard about them. They said it was mostly sailboat racing and like that. But they did have steamboats that had a store, a trade store or something. My mother said the first grit she ever ate came off of one of those boats. They bought it. The boats had to have a lot of water, so they couldn't come in close to the shore, but people would row out to the boats and buy things. Food to eat, I don't know what all they had, but grits was one thing Mother said they bought off the trade, they called them the trade boats. But everything seemed to be, most of the travel was by water, you know. They didn't have very good roads, and of course we didn't have any airplanes, you know, like that.
Did you ever see any of the steamboats, or were they gone?
They're gone. Those were. I've seen pictures of them, read something about them.
You talked about, did you ever go to the beach to go swimming, or?
No, we weren't allowed to go swimming in the river. It was so muddy there in Mullet Creek where we lived. Mother wouldn't let us go in. I learned how to float after I moved to Grant. And we used to go up to Malabar to my cousin Victoria Moeller's there. And the boys learned how to swim. They just got out anyway and learned, you know. I went out with them one fall, and fall of the year, it was roe mullet time. You know, when they have roe mullet, they're heavier and bigger fish, and it's just once a year in the fall, early winter. And they caught 623 pounds of fish in one setting of net. That's how thick the fish were, you know, how numerous they were. That was good fishing times. You don't have it anymore like that.
Did you ever go down to the ocean beach?
Yes, sometimes. Wade along the shore. We thought it was fun. And those little coquina clams, you'd stand in the sand and move your feet and they'd come up out of the sand, little tiny clams. You've probably seen them. And they made good soup. Something like oyster stew.
Let's see. I guess they had a county fair.
In Old Galley.
Mm-hmm.
Last year I was in school, 1918. I worked on books, mean from school. I was in Melbourne school in the 10th grade, and all the pupils in my class were boys, and they wrote left-handed. You couldn't hardly read their writing. So the teacher said, would I copy some of their work? I don't know. I learned to read their writing because I guess I just kind of grew into it. But then I took a course one time on letter writing. I thought I wanted to work in the post office sometime, and I never did. But anyway, we'd send those books to the fair to be examined. And my father had some kumquat trees, a couple of kumquat trees, and Mother made kumquat jelly, and she got a blue ribbon on her kumquat jelly that year. I have a lovely kumquat tree. It bears real good.
The fairs had different agricultural exhibits.
Yes, different things from different towns, but they had it in Old Galley. That's Melbourne now, but to me it's still Old Galley. Just like Old Galley.
Do you recall if they had baseball teams?
Yes, my brothers, they had a little team in Grant. And I wrote the letters on the t-shirts of my brothers. I remember Elmer's youngest brothers, Grant on them. Had a lot of fun. And we girls would go around and take one of the boys' hats or caps and pass it around for a collection. They never charged for the game, and just take out the money that they'd give us to buy bats and balls or whatever. Yeah, they play Fellsmere, play Sebastian, play Malabar, and the little towns. I don't know if they ever played Melbourne or not, but they had a little ballpark down there, Sandlot. And one time we went to Fellsmere, I think, and played out there. And one of my boyfriends was a pitcher, so of course I had to go. I like to see him pitch. Two or three of my brothers played, Charna and John and Elmer. I had a brother on Wake Island in the war. He used to work for Catch Manufacturing. He's my youngest brother. And he saved his money. He didn't make a lot of money there, but he saved. He said he wanted to amount to something. So after he got some money together, he went to electrical school. I think it was in Cleveland, Ohio. And while there, he met a boy from New York City. And he told him, he says, Smitty, our last name was Smith, he called him Smitty. He said, come go with me to New York, Smitty, and I'll get you a job. So he did, and they were building the Lincoln Tunnel under the Hudson River. And he was what they call a sandhawk down under, the hardtop hats. When they completed that job, the superintendent said, who wants to go west? We're going to Idaho to dredge for gold. It won't be a big job. When they finished that job, he said, who wants to go to Wake Island? Of course, Elmer wanted to see the world, and a lot of others, 1,100 of them went over there. And they had the airstrip almost completed. They attacked Wake Island the day after Pearl Harbor. And my youngest sister, she was very close to my youngest brother. They were the two youngest children in the family. She was working in a large restaurant in Morristown, New Jersey, living with my sister Ida and her family up there. She heard the news, and she said, I've just got to get in there. I just got to go. And so she joined the WACs. They were taking the WACs starting in. And she went to Des Moines, Iowa for basic training. From there to Spokane, Washington. They sent her home for 2 weeks to get her clothing ready for overseas. She didn't tell her where. It was England, London. Submarine chased the boat going over. And they had those buzz bombs coming across from France, the English Channel to England. And she said it was very scary, but she came through all right. And she met this man that's a flyer. He was one of the pilots on the plane. And wonderful husband. She and he were married in a church over there. And they were in Germany twice. She got to be a captain while she was in the WACs over there. And she's has a lot of memories. But it happened that Elmer, my brother,
had some friends. There were 3 brothers, and they never separated those 3 brothers all the way through the war. Their name was Zivic, Z-I-V-I-C, and they were from Des Moines, Iowa. And there was a picture of them been reunited with their sister somewhere in Ohio, and we had relatives in Ohio, and she sent me the picture. She said, maybe, Laura, you might write to one of them and find out something about Elmer, the brother. Well, it was about 6 weeks before I heard from him. He said, we've been all over the west coast of the United States, we've been on radio, everything, and being interviewed, and I'm sorry I hadn't written sooner. But he said Elmer was one, or Smitty was one of my best friends there. And he said, I came upon him one night. I was out delivering ammunition, and he was stationed at a machine gun, just like a Marine, on a hill there. And he said to me, Tom, how about something to eat? He said, we're getting pretty hungry out here. We haven't had anything for hours. He said he told me to do the best he could, and he'd go on his way. And as he said, when they went, before they took him to Japan, he and his brothers never were separated, the 3 of them. And they never separated them. And he said, before we leave, I'm going to give you my best girlfriend's name and address. And Elmer gave him his. He said, whoever gets back first can write, you know. So he said, I'd prefer that you write to her. She was in New York. He met her there, I guess. But he wrote us a nice letter. The last letter we had from him, Mother had a letter. It was written on Thanksgiving before the attack in December. And he said, we've had the nicest Thanksgiving dinner, everything from soup to nuts. We have a wonderful chef. And I presume we'll have about the same for Christmas. And he said, the big shot from Japan on his way to Washington to talk peace is on the clipper ship. I got to get the letter out there before they leave. So you'll get this letter. And that was the last time they let him write a letter. Later we heard they kept them prisoners for 3 years, starving maybe, we don't know what all did to them. Took them out, tied their hands and feet, and shot them in the back. They have a monument there now on the island. My sons found out. And just, war is so terrible.
So around here, after the war was really when the space program started.
What kind?
The space program, when they
Oh,
brought
yes.
all those rockets over here, some of those
Yes,
German
that
rockets.
was really exciting when they started that.
How did that change the South County area?
Well, I don't know too much about that. I know that more people came in and they had to have homes, and some people, like my husband, built these 2 apartments. They'd have a place to live. They didn't have any housing up there much at that time.
Okay.
It was different. It was a different life, I guess, what we used to.
Okay, let's cut.
Okay, tell us who this is.
This is my father, Robert Toombs Smith was his name. He was fighting in the Civil War, and when they finished fighting at Olustee, which is near Jacksonville, southwest Jacksonville, he walked all the way back to southwest Georgia because my father had been born, and he heard about a new baby at home, so he wanted to get home and see the baby. And he was ragged and dirty and needed to be shaved and everything, and he knew his wife wouldn't know him. He knocked on his door at home, and she came to the door, and he said, lady, I've been on the road for several days. I know I'm ragged and dirty and all, but would you mind trying to give me a little something to eat? I'm hungry. She started getting him something to eat, and he put his arm around her and said, honey, I'm your husband.
That was your grandfather?
Papa's father. And he liked his commanding officer so much. I think he was a colonel or something in the service, in the Civil War, that he said, I'm going to name him for myself, Robert, and I'm going to give him my commanding officer, whom I like so much, Toombs, be his middle name. Everybody wondered, T-O-O-M-B-S, where he got it. And last name was Smith.
And where is your father standing here?
Well, it's near the creek. Excuse me, did you want me to leave it there?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm sorry. You see through there the water. It's up not far west of the house. And And Mother made his shirts. He had very fair skin, like I have. And Mother made long sleeve shirts for him and put mitts over the backs of his hands because he'd blister. It was very fair skin. And she made his shirts, and he always wore a mustache, always as long as I could remember. And he loved that old place. I'm built like him, kinda, you know.
Let's cut.
Okay, who's this?
My father was quite an entertainer, and he had these friends who came, some of them from DeLand. This Mr. House here next to him on his right, and then my mother over here. And he liked music, so he was playing them a tune on his banjo, but he often played the fiddle, he called it. And he was live for the party. He just jig a little bit, dance a little bit around, and sing a little bit. Everybody had get a kick out of him, you know, because he was like a clown sometimes almost. But that's typical Florida. This is a banana tree, and those are the cabbage palmettos, I call them.
Was that near your home place?
And yes, it's on the place. It's over there near the woods. Like,
Everyone's dressed up in ties and...
well, I guess they had a little party. Sometimes they'd come over and have a dance over there. He'd play for them, you know. Oh, I have a poem to read you before we go about him. When he was 61, one of his friends wrote a birthday poem for him.
Okay, and cut.
Rolling.
This is on the left, sitting on the bench, is my sister Ida Smith. Next to her, on her left, is John Smith, her brother, and then Bill Smith, another brother, and me standing up, and then my brother, oldest brother, Charner, Charner Smith, on the very end of the bench on the right. And the man standing up behind us with the hat on, the coat, he's a cousin, first cousin, and this is his nephew, his sister's son. It's John Summerford from Georgia. Because we were so many of us, they didn't have chairs at the table. It took up too much room, I guess, and so my father made a long bench for us to sit on at the table. There were only... let's see, there were only 5 of us. He had 3 more after that, 8 in all.
I notice I don't see many shoes in that picture.
No, I said we went barefoot. I probably had shoes on, but you can't see my feet. But he was nice to us. This cousin of ours came down, and his sister went over the river and cooked for Papa one winter. She felt sorry for him, living over there and cooking for himself and everything. And this is her son. Her husband had died with typhoid when she first married. But he's married a woman up there, and they moved to Apopka for years. He took care of some of the groves up there. And their daughter lives in Melbourne Beach. Her husband used to have a men's store there at the shopping center in Melbourne. She's a nice girl.
Okay,
Well, it's first the creek running into the Indian River there. They call it Palm Bay, as the town of Palm Bay. It's a bay there, like, and the 2 waters come together. The Turkey Creek that runs into Indian River is fresh water. And I've seen lots of water hyacinths floating down with their beautiful purple blossoms. They're a nuisance. They clog up small streams sometimes, but they're pretty to look at. These cabbage palmettos, I call them, these taller trees, are our state tree. It's really the sable, S-A-B-A-L palm. The state garden club people, I think, are the